Hey y'all, it's Robin. Welcome back to my channel. Today we are doing some winter reading recommendations. So these are some cozy, snowy books that are perfect for the winter months. These aren't necessarily holiday romances. If you do want some holiday romances, I will link my holiday romance recommendations up in the cards and down in the description box. I think I have one book in here that does overlap with that holiday recommendations, but the rest of these are all new recommendations. So I'm going to start with the one non-romance book and then go into the rest of them, which are all romance reads. So let's get right into the recommendations. So starting with the one non-romance book, and that is Winterwood by Shay Earnshaw. This is going to be a bit of a polarizing recommendation. I know that a lot of people didn't end up loving this book, but I ended up giving this 5 stars. I love Shay Earnshaw's writing, and I just felt like it fit so perfectly with this snowy story. So this is a YA fantasy that takes place during a snowstorm, and we are following our heroine who is part of a magical family, and she and her mother live across the way from this all-boys boarding school, and one of the boys at the school goes missing the night of a massive snowstorm. That boy ends up coming to her cabin asking for help, and the two of them have to unravel the mystery of what happened to him, all while this massive snowstorm is happening. There is a magical woods. This has a very purple prose, beautiful atmospheric writing and setting, and I absolutely love it. I know that the romance in here is pretty insta-levy and pretty fast-paced, but that didn't like impact my enjoyment in any way, and I just really liked the mystery aspect mixed with the magical elements. And one of my favorite things about this is that in between each of the chapters are these little pages from the family spell book. So you get to read like a little entry from the family members, and then there is like a recipe or a spell. And I really loved those additions. I love books inside of books, and that just made for like a really immersive read. Getting into the rest of the books, which are all romances, first up is Bringing Down the Duke by Evie Dunmore. This is a historical romance. It is the first book in a series. However, I don't believe that any of these really need to be read in order, but this first one I am recommending because it does take place during winter. In fact, there is a scene in here where they are having like a New Year's ball, and so it really takes place over the entire couple of months of winter. Plus, our hero is a very icy, grumpy man, and so I feel like this just has all of the perfect vibes for winter. Our heroine is one of the first women attending Oxford, but in order to maintain her scholarship, she has to help the suffragettes like recruit people to their cause, and she ends up getting assigned this like really cold, closed off dupe, and she has to try to convince him to help them gain rights to vote. The two of them have an enemies to lovers romance. I really love the grumpy sunshine trope. This was like the peak example of it, so if you are looking to get into historicals, I think this would be a great one to start with. After that is a novella, and that is Below Zero by Ali Hazelwood. This is also part of a series. However, none of these novellas need to be read in order. They are each following a woman from their little friend group, and as you can tell from the title and the cover, this has a very snowy setting. We are following our heroine, who is an engineer, and she ends up going to the Arctic for a test of some equipment. And when she is there, she ends up getting trapped, and no one is willing to go save her except for her boss and sworn enemy. This has an enemies to lovers romance. It has caretaking in it. This has like a really good take on miscommunication. I know Ali Hazelwood has been criticized for using miscommunication in all of her books, but I eat it up every single time. So if you have liked Ali Hazelwood's previous books and you haven't tried these novellas, I highly recommend giving them a try. She does such a good job of building the backstory and making this novella not feel like it is missing anything. Next up is an entire series, and that is the Simple Wild series by K.A. Tucker. If you have read this series, I really recommend Running Wild by K.A. Tucker. And if you haven't read any of them, definitely start with The Simple Wild. So this first series, The Simple Wild, it's 2.5 books, so it's 2 full books and a novella. The novella does take place over the holiday season, so if you haven't checked out the novella, I really recommend it. It's a fun, good time. But this first series is following Calla and Jonah, and Calla ends up going to Alaska in order to get to know her father. Her father is very ill, and she's never had a close relationship with her father because she lives in Canada, and her mother left Alaska when she was very, very young. And now that she knows that her father is dying, she decides to go to Alaska to spend time with him and get to know him. And while she is there, she forms a Grumpy Sunshine enemies to lovers romance with a bush pilot named Jonah, and the two of them have this very, very swoony romance. And then the spin-off is Running Wild, and I know a lot of people who read The Simple Wild decided not to read the spin-off, and I really think you should. This is following one of the characters that we met in The Simple Wild, and she's not particularly likable in this first book, but you really get to know Marie in this spin-off and like why she did the things that she did, and she does know that what she did is wrong. It is her romance and getting to know who she is and again why she did the things that she did. This has a sled race in it, so she always volunteers for the dog sled races in Alaska, and you get to see the sled race, which is really cool. There's a lot of dogs in here. The heroine is also a veterinarian, and so this has another really, really good romance. Like I said, I know a lot of people didn't want to read this one because it was Marie, but I do recommend picking this one up if you did love this. Doesn't necessarily undo what she did in here, but you do end up like sympathizing with her and like understanding where she came from, and she does own up to her mistakes. So after that is Written in the Stars by Alexandra Bellafleur, and this is book 1 in a series. It is again a total standalone, and you can read the subsequent books as standalones as well. But this first one is set during winter, and in fact, there is, I think it all leads up to a New Year's Eve party, if I'm remembering correctly. So this entire book does take place in winter in Seattle. This is a Pride and Prejudice retelling, and it is following these two women who go on this really, really terrible first date. But when Darcy's brother asks how the date went in order to get him off her back, she says that the date was fantastic. And then she asks the other heroine, Elle, to fake date her so that she can get her brother off her back. And the two of them end up fake dating so that they can survive the holidays, and all leading up to this really big New Year's party. And it is them catching feelings and falling in love. The one overlap from my holiday recommendations is Love Light Farms by B.K. Borison, and I just could not pass up another excuse to recommend this book. I read this late in November and absolutely fell in love with it. This is a friends to lovers romance that is just done so expertly. It is following this heroine who owns this small tree farm, and when she purchased the tree farm, she unknowingly inherited a whole lot of debt, and despite the success of their tree farm, she is unable to get the tree farm out of this hole. And in order to try and help their farm, she fills out an application for this competition with this big internet influencer. She lies on the application and says that her and her boyfriend purchased the tree farm together. The only problem is she doesn't have a boyfriend, and she enlists her best friend of 10 years to pretend to be her boyfriend. It is unbelievably swoony. I loved these characters so much. The hero is one of my favorite love interests of all times, and I really liked the epilogue in this one. I feel like romance epilogues now are always like, oh, we had a baby, or oh, we got married, and that is not the case with this one. And I loved this epilogue. I loved everything about this book. So highly, highly recommend this one if you have not checked this out yet. And the audiobook is fantastic if you are an audiobook listener. Next up is 8 Perfect Hours by Leah Lewis. This was released last year around the winter Christmas season, and despite the look of this cover, this is actually not a holiday romance. So this actually takes place in January, and it goes through like, I think summer, fall-ish of the following year. So this opens up in January during a freak snowstorm, and our heroine is stuck on the road because of the snowstorm, coming back from a really terrible reunion, and she ends up getting out of her car and spending 8 hours with the man in the car next to her, and they have this absolutely amazing time together. And then they go their separate ways, thinking they'll never see each other again, only they end up finding their way back to each other, and it is them falling in love and kind of figuring out who they are as people. Both of them are going through some pretty intense things in their personal life, and they help each other figure out those journeys. And I adore Leah Lewis's writing. I love the way that she crafts her characters, and this is just such a good snowy book. Next up is kind of an oddball one. It has more to do with me personally than this being perfect for the winter months, but that is All Roads Lead Here by Mariana Zapata. I am recommending this one for winter, not because it takes place during winter. I actually can't even remember when this book takes place, but this book takes place in the mountains, and I always associate mountains with snow. And I don't know why. I don't know if that's just a me thing, but whenever I think of mountains, I think of snow, and because of that, I feel like this would be perfect for the winter months. This actually might take place at some point during winter. I can't quite remember, but this one is following our heroine who is moving back to Colorado for the first time since she was a child. She is moving back there because she needs a fresh start after getting out of a very, very long-term relationship. She had rented a room above a garage online, and when she arrives there, it turns out that the person that sold her or rented her the apartment is actually the teenage son of our hero, and our hero did not know that his son rented out this space. They end up reaching an agreement that allows her to stay until she's able to find a different place to live. And it is a very, very slow burn Grumpy Sunshine romance. I know that I have a lot of Grumpy Sunshine romances on here, but this is one of my favorite Grumpy Sunshines of all time. If you are going to go into a Mariana Zapata book, though, I do want you to be aware that these books are long, and you are going to wait until about right here before you get to the romance. So it is a very slow burn, and you have to wait a lot of pages, but I really, really love how she builds these relationships because you really get to believe in their connection. You spend so much time watching these people get to know each other and become friends and care for each other. And by the time that you get to the culmination, you are completely convinced that these two will end up together forever. I actually do have one more book that was on my holiday romance recommendations, and I didn't realize it was out here until right now, but that is the remaking of Corbin Whale by Roan Parrish. This is technically a holiday romance. One of the heroes is Jewish. In this one, we are following a hero who ends up taking over the coffee shop bakery from his family, and he ends up revamping it and is now the lead baker and owner of this little coffee shop. And there is a customer that comes in every single day that is kind of one of the outcasts of the small town, and the two of them end up forming this relationship, this really close friendship, and eventually a romance. This has amazing neurodiversity rep in it, and it has this very lyrical, magical feeling. This almost feels like magical realism. However, it is not magical in any way. You are just in the mind of this very creative person, and it ends up feeling magical. And I absolutely loved this book. It is beautifully written, it is beautifully executed. I love the romance so much. After that, we have a novella series, and that is the A Tale of Two Cities series by Alexandra Warren. I am going to recommend the entire series here. Just know that I've only read 2 of the 5 books so far. I've read the Thanksgiving and the Halloween romances, but there's also a Christmas, New Year's, and Valentine's Day romance. I put the remaining 3 on my winter TBR. I know that I loved the first 2, so I feel pretty safe recommending the rest of the series. So this series is surrounding all of these people who all have the names of cities, hence Tale of Two Cities, and it is their romances set around the holidays. And these are just really fun, really steamy romances, and I am completely obsessed with the series. And then the final book on the series is one of my favorite romances of all time, and it is one that I recommend every winter, and I think I will re-recommend it every single winter, and that is Credence by Penelope Douglas. This is my personal favorite Penelope Douglas. This is following our heroine who at 17 loses both her parents, and she ends up going to live with her uncle, who isn't really her uncle, it is her father's stepbrother. And so they're not actually related in any way, but she ends up living with her step uncle and his 2 sons. And it is a It is a romance between her and each of the guys at some point. They live in this like very isolated cabin on this mountain all winter long. They are stranded on this cabin, the four of them together, and a lot of steamy things occur. I know that a lot of people didn't like this one. There is a lot of morally gray things in here, and that's okay. I'm totally cool with it. I am not advocating that anyone actually experience this, but it made for a great book. And if you haven't tried this one, I highly recommend it. I have not checked out the audiobook, so I have no idea how the audiobook is for this one, but I've read it physically twice, and I kind of want to reread it again now that I'm talking about it. So that is it for my winter reading recommendations. Let me know if you've read any of these or if you've put any of these onto your TBR, and I will catch y'all in my next video. Bye!